The wind in the town of Frostwood didn't just howl that night. It screamed. It tore through the pine trees with a fury that shook the very foundations of the pack houses. But inside the Alpha's lodge, warmed by roaring fires and glittering chandeliers, the storm was nothing more than a dramatic backdrop to the celebration. It was Alpha Kayel's birthday, and the entire pack had gathered to witness a historic moment. I, Ilara, stood pressed against a cold marble pillar, a ghost in my own life. My simple linen dress was a stain of gray against a sea of jewel-colored silks and furs. I was 19, an Omega with no wolf to call my own, the daughter of the pack's groundskeeper. A mistake. That's what my entire existence felt like, especially since the moon goddess, in her cruel irony, had declared me the fated mate of Kayel, the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. I watched him from across the room, Kayel Blackwood. He was carved from shadow and arrogance, with eyes the color of a frozen lake and a smile that never reached them. He held court, surrounded by laughing warriors and elegant she-wolves. My heart, a frantic, foolish bird, beat against my ribs. Tonight was the night. Tonight he would finally acknowledge the bond. He would call me to his side. I had to believe it. A familiar, cloying scent of night-blooming jasmine enveloped me. "He looks magnificent, doesn't he?" Seraphina Drake purred, appearing at my elbow like a beautiful viper. She was a beta, fierce and flawless, and she had been Kayel's constant companion for years. Everyone assumed she would be his Luna. Everyone but the moon. "It must be agony," she continued, sipping her wine, "to stand so close to a destiny you'll never touch." I said nothing. Arguing with Seraphina was like trying to stop the blizzard outside with a whisper. The music faded. A hush fell over the crowd. Kayel ascended the dais, his presence sucking the air from the room. My breath caught. This was it. His gaze swept over his people, and for one breathtaking, soul-shattering second, his eyes found mine. Time stopped. Hope, painful and bright, bloomed in my chest. "My loyal pack," his voice boomed, deep and resonant. "We gather at a time of great change. Our enemies grow bold at our borders. Strength is not just desired now, it is demanded." The crowd roared its approval. I took an involuntary step forward, my hands trembling. A true alpha must make hard choices for the survival of his people. He cannot be swayed by sentiment or by faulty destiny. A cold trickle of dread dripped down my spine. Faulty destiny? Kayel's eyes turned to steel. "The moon goddess tests us with our fated bonds, but I will not let a test jeopardize my pack. I need a Luna who can fight beside me, a Luna who can lead warriors, a Luna of pure, unbroken bloodline." He paused, and the silence became a physical weight, crushing me. "Therefore, before the pack and under the moon's witness, I, Alpha Kayel Blackwood, reject Ilara, daughter of Silas, as my mate and Luna." The words were a guillotine. The rejection bond, that fragile silver thread that had connected my soul to his, snapped. The pain was not emotional. It was a visceral, white-hot agony that ripped through my core. I gasped, doubling over, my hands clawing at my chest where my heart was being torn out. "No!" The word was a torn whisper lost in the vacuum of sound. Kayel's voice cut through the haze of my suffering. "A rejected mate is a source of division, a weakness. For the strength and unity of Frostwood, I declare Ilara exiled. She has 1 hour to cross our territorial boundary." Exile. The word echoed. The storm. The killing cold. It was a death sentence wrapped in legal pack decree. "Kayel, please!" I found my voice, a raw scream of desperation. I stumbled through the stunned crowd, my vision blurring with tears. I reached the dais, looking up at the man who held my life in his hands. "Where will I go? It's a blizzard. You're sending me to my death." He looked down at me, and in his frozen eyes I saw no remnant of the boy I'd secretly loved for years. There was only cold, calculated disdain. Serafina slithered to his side, her arms slipping possessively through him. "The Alpha has spoken, little Omega. Your hour is ticking." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me, yet it echoed in the marrow of my bones. "Then die, Ilara. Consider it your first and last service to this pack. Be buried and forgotten." The guards, men who had eaten at my family's table, whose children I had cared for, grabbed my arms. Their faces were masks of stony obedience. I fought, a weak, frantic struggle, as they dragged me backward across the polished floor. My screams were swallowed by the restarting music. They hauled me to the grand oak doors and threw me out into the maelstrom. The cold was an immediate, shocking violence. It stole my breath and seared my skin. A small, sodden bag, my pathetic life, tossed into a puddle, landed next to me. "1 hour, exile," the head guard barked before slamming the doors shut, sealing away the light and the warmth and the life I had known. Alone, utterly alone in the screaming white dark. The wind tore at my thin dress, and the snow stung my face like 1,000 needles. I grabbed the wet bag, my tears freezing instantly on my cheeks. I had no one, no family, no home, no future. I started to walk, driven by a primal instinct to survive. Every step was agony. The snowdrifts swallowed my legs to the knees. Within minutes, my feet were blocks of numb ice. I was walking to my death, and I knew it. The forest around me was a roaring white monster. I stumbled off the road, disoriented, the world reduced to a swirling, blinding hell. My body betrayed me. My legs buckled, and I fell hard into a snowdrift. The impact knocked the last vestiges of warmth from my lungs. I lay there. The temptation to simply close my eyes and let the snow blanket me was overwhelming. Why fight? His words echoed. Be buried and forgotten. But then, through the ice forming on my lashes, I saw a shape. A dark, jagged silhouette against the relentless white. A massive, derelict structure on the very edge of the disputed lands. The Howler's Den. Every pup in Frostwood was warned about it, a place of cursed ground where monsters from the Great Wars were said to sleep, where wolves who had lost their souls were rumored to dwell. Terror of the unknown fought with the certain death of the cold. The unknown won. With the last of my strength, I pushed myself up. "Better a monster than the ice," I croaked through chattering teeth. I half crawled, half dragged myself toward the looming shadow. The enormous double doors hung crookedly, one slightly ajar. I squeezed through the narrow gap into absolute darkness. The roar of the wind muted to a mournful whistle, and it was warmer. Not warm, but shielded from the thrilling wind. The air was thick with the scent of ancient dry hay, damp earth, and something else. Something wild. Musk and pine, and a deep, earthy power that vibrated in the silent space. Exhaustion claimed me. I couldn't see, could barely think. I crawled forward, my hands scraping on the rough wooden floor. My fingers brushed against a huge, soft mound of hay in the center of the space. Salvation. I whimpered in relief, pulling myself onto it. But it wasn't just hay. The mound shifted. It was firm and warm and breathing. My blood turned to ice water. Before I could react, my hand, seeking purchase, sank into thick, coarse fur. Living fur. A sound began, so low it was more a vibration than a noise. It rumbled up through the floorboards and into my very bones. A growl. not of anger, but of warning, a primal sound that spoke of teeth and claws and effortless slaughter. I was going to die, not by cold, but by tooth and claw. A hysterical, broken sound escaped my lips. I had escaped one death for another. Please, I whispered into the oppressive dark, my voice a frozen thread. I'm so tired. Just let me sleep here. If you must, eat me in the morning. But please, just let me be warm tonight. The growling stopped. The silence that followed was heavier. Then a great heaving sigh like a mountain settling. In my delirious hypothermic state, it sounded like acceptance. I had no strength left for fear. My body gave out. I collapsed against the immense warm flank of the creature. I curled into a ball, and in a final, unconscious act of seeking comfort, my fingers tangled in the dense, warm fur. And there, in the heart of the Howler's Den, surrounded by the legends of monsters, Ilara, the rejected, the exiled, the forgotten, fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. Sunlight, sharp and merciless, pried my eyes open. It sliced through the gaps in the rotten roof of the Howler's Den, painting dusty golden stripes across my face. For one blissful, heart-stopping moment, I forgot. I forgot the rejection, the brutal cold, the exile. I was simply warm. Impossibly, wonderfully warm, wrapped in a cocoon of gentle heat. I stretched, a soft sigh escaping my lips. My legs felt heavy, weighted down by the most comfortable blankets I'd ever known. I blinked, the sleep clearing from my vision, and my world shattered for the second time in less than a day. I was not looking at a blanket. I was looking at a muzzle, a massive charcoal gray muzzle crisscrossed with pale silvery scars. A long, jagged one ran from between its eyes down the bridge of its nose. The wolf it belonged to was the size of a small horse, its chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm directly beside my head. My breath froze in my throat. A whimper tried to escape, but fear sealed my lips. Slowly, with infinite care, I turned my head to the left. A russet-colored wolf, even larger than the gray one, had its massive head pillowed on my stomach. One of its ears twitched at my movement. To my right, a wolf of pure liquid shadow was curled tightly around my back, its body radiating heat like a furnace. And at my feet, a tangled pile of limbs and fur, more wolves, their sizes and colors a spectrum of wild beauty and raw power. 10. There were 10 of them. 10 legendary, monstrous wolves formed a perfect protective circle, and I was the still, silent center, the yolk in an egg of living, breathing predators. The stories of the Howler's Den crashed over me. The rogue reapers, the cursed pack, wolves so feral they killed anything that moved. My mind screamed at me to run, to scramble away, but my body was paralyzed by a terror so complete it was calm. The russet wolf on my stomach opened one eye. It was a luminous, ancient gold, holding an intelligence that was both terrifying and profound. It looked directly into my soul. I stopped breathing. Every instinct told me to avert my gaze, to show submission, but I was frozen. "Good doggy?" I squeaked, the absurdity of the words hanging in the dusty air. The wolf's golden eye seemed to glint. It huffed, a sound of such dry amusement that it vibrated through my body. Then, with deliberate slowness, it closed its eye again and settled its head more firmly on me, as if claiming its spot. Before I could process this, a new sound tore through the fragile peace, the loud, protesting creak of the barn door's ancient hinges. The change in the den was instantaneous. The lazy, sleeping giants vanished. Every single wolf stiffened. The warm, heavy weights around me became tense coils of ready muscle. The air, once drowsy with warmth, crackled with lethal intent. A voice, loud and arrogant, echoed from outside. "The tracker on her phone died right here, Alpha. She's in there." My blood ran cold. Kale. "Good," he replied, bored and dismissive. "No one survives a night like that in a linen dress. Find the body. We need to dispose of it properly before the council hears we had an exile death." Alpha Kale, that's the Howler's Den. The stories are for children, Greg. Open the door. If there are rogues, I'll enjoy putting them down. The door was kicked open. Sunlight flooded the entrance, outlining Kale's tall, arrogant frame and 4 of his enforcers. They were armed, their postures confident. "All right, let's find the little traitor and—" Kale's command died in his throat. He stood there, silhouetted in the light, his eyes widening as they adjusted to the dim interior and took in the scene. His enforcers took a collective step back, their confidence evaporating. A low, vibrating sound began from the russet wolf, still using me as a pillow. It wasn't a growl, it was a promise, a declaration of territory. Crunch. The sound of bones realigning, of sinew and muscle reforming, filled the barn. It was not the painful, chaotic shifting I was used to seeing. This was fluid, practiced, and terrifyingly efficient. The russet wolf rose on its hind legs, its form melting and reshaping. Fur receded, claws retracted, and within seconds, a man stood where the wolf had been. He was naked, but his bearing was so regal, so utterly commanding that the fact was irrelevant. He was immense, muscles carved from granite and oak, his skin a map of old wars written in scars. Long, dark hair fell around a face that was all sharp angles and grim authority. He looked at Kale with an expression of profound boredom. "You are loud," he said, his voice like stones grinding together at the bottom of a deep river. "And you woke her up." Kale bristled, his alpha aura flaring in the face of this blatant challenge. "I am Alpha Kale Blackwood of the Frostwood Pack. Who are you to address me? Step aside. I am here for the girl. She is pack refuse." The stranger, this giant of a man, tilted his head. He glanced back at me, huddled in the hay, and then back to Kale. "Refuse?" he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "She is a rejected Omega, a defect. She died last night. I am collecting the corpse." A dark, cruel smile touched the stranger's lips. "She looks very alive to me, boy." Around him, the other 9 wolves began to shift. One by one, they rose into the forms of men. Each was as formidable as the first, scarred and fierce, their eyes locked on Kale's enforcers with an unnerving hunger. Kale took an involuntary step back. His eyes darted to a tattoo on the russet man's chest, a stark black sun being consumed by a silhouette of a wolf. Recognition, followed by sheer panic, dawned on his face. "That mark," his beta, Greg, whispered in horror. "Who are you?" Kale demanded, his voice losing its steadiness. The leader took a step forward, the dust of the den swirling around his bare feet. "I am Lysander," he said, the name itself seeming to chill the air. "And these are my brothers, the Shadow Guard. We were the king's own. Now we are the keepers of this place." He pointed a finger directly at me, his gaze never leaving Kale. "And we found her." "Her?" Kale spat, a desperate laugh in his voice. "She's a gardener's daughter. She's nothing." Lysander's eyes flashed a molten gold. "She is the only thing in a decade that has quieted the storm in our blood. She slept in the heart of our circle, and we did not tear her apart. We warmed her." He took another step, his presence expanding to fill the entire space. "You called her trash. You threw her to the ice. That was your right as Alpha, however pitiful." He looked at his brothers, a silent command passing between them. But it is my right, as commander of the Shadow Guard, to declare this den and the woman within it under our protection." His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Boys, the little alpha thinks he can take our guest. Show him the door." What happened next was not a fight. It was an eviction. The 9 men moved with a speed that blurred. Cale and his enforcers were grabbed, lifted, and hurled out through the open doors as if they weighed nothing. They landed in a groaning, crumpled heap in the snow outside. Lysander stood in the doorway, the winter sun gleaming on his scarred skin. "If you come back," he called out, his voice carrying easily on the cold air, "I will not throw you. I will nail your skull to this doorframe. Do you understand?" Cale scrambled up, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. He looked past Lysander, his eyes finding mine. "You'll regret this," he screamed, spitting blood into the snow. "You're siding with monsters. They'll destroy you." A spark of something new ignited in my chest. It wasn't hope, it was defiance. "Go away, Cale," I shouted, my voice stronger than I felt. With a final venomous glare, Cale turned and fled, his enforcers stumbling after him. Silence descended again, thicker than before. Lysander turned from the door. The terrifying intensity faded from his eyes, replaced by a deep, curious contemplation. He walked to the corner, picked up my discarded damp bag, and pulled out the oversized flannel shirt I used for chores. He brought it to me. "Put this on," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You're shivering." The first days in the Howler's Den passed in a surreal, dreamlike haze. I expected to be a prisoner or a servant, or perhaps a delayed meal. Instead, I found myself at the center of a strange and cautious orbit. Lysander was the unmoving center of their world, watching me with those unsettling golden eyes that saw too much. Then there was Jax, a mountain of sun-bleached hair and a grin that was disarmingly bright, who presented me with still warm rabbits every morning. I learned to politely decline the raw meat. Silas, a man whose face was a tapestry of brutal scars and who never spoke, fixed the leaking roof over my pile of hay after seeing a single drop of icy water land on my shoulder. There were 7 others: Corbin, Finn, Reese, Gideon, Asher, Leo, and Kaelin, the Shadow Guard, legends who had walked out of bedtime stories and into my shattered life. I could feel them. A deep, aching fracture ran through each of them, a silent scream held just beneath the surface. The truth of their brokenness revealed itself on the 4th night. I was jerked from sleep not by a nightmare of my own, but a real one. A scream of pure, unadulterated agony ripped through the den, a sound of such profound rage and despair it stole the air from my lungs. I sat up, my heart hammering. In the far corner, Corbin was thrashing. He wasn't just moving, he was a storm of violence, clawed hands gouging deep furrows into the wooden wall, his body contorting. His eyes were rolled back, white foam flecking his lips. "The blood, it won't stop! Make it stop!" he shrieked, his voice not entirely human. Lysander and Finn were trying to hold him, but Corbin flung them off with impossible strength. He was a puppet with its strings cut, dancing to a tune of pure madness. Jax appeared beside my pile of hay, his usual grin gone, his body tense as a bowstring. "The madness," he whispered, his voice grim. "It's taking him." "What is it?" I asked, my own terror a cold knot in my stomach. "The price," he said, his eyes never leaving Corbin. "The old king, he remade us, made us stronger, faster, perfect weapons, but his magic was the lock on our cages. Without him, the beasts inside us go mad. We all will. That's why we came here, to die away from the world we could no longer protect." Corbin roared, a sound that promised annihilation. He threw Lysander across the den with a casual swipe. Then his head snapped around, his eyes now glowing a sickly, furious red, locked on me. Prey. The thought was a whisper in the air. He lunged, a blur of lethal intent. "No!" Lysander bellowed, scrambling up. But I didn't run. A strange calm descended over me. The fear evaporated, replaced by a warm, pulling sensation in my chest. It was like a hidden thread, glowing and gentle, had always been connected to Corbin, and I was only now feeling its tug. Instinct took over. I stood up and stepped forward right into his path. I raised my hand, palm out. "Corbin," I said. My voice was quiet, but it resonated with a power I didn't recognize, a harmonic, soothing frequency that seemed to still the very dust in the air. He froze, not like he was obeying a command, but as if he'd run into an invisible, soft wall. His momentum crashed to a halt, and he dropped to the floor at my feet, panting like a wounded animal. The terrifying red glow in his eyes sputtered and died, replaced by his normal, confused brown. The violent tension drained from his body, leaving him looking young and lost. "Alara?" he whispered, his voice raw. "The blood, it won't stop. Make it stop." The den was utterly silent. Every man was staring at me, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and desperate, fragile hope. Lysander slowly got to his feet. He looked from Corbin's peaceful face to mine. "Do you feel it?" he asked the room, his own voice hushed. Silas, the silent one, touched his own temple, a look of wonder on his scarred face. He nodded once. "For the first time in 5 years," Finn breathed, closing his eyes. "My wolf is quiet." Lysander walked toward me. He moved slowly, as if I were a mirage that might dissolve. He stopped a foot away, his gaze intense. He inhaled deeply, as if tasting the air around me. "You are not just an omega, Alara," he murmured, the revelation dawning in his golden eyes. "You're an anchor, a spirit weaver. It's a gift that died with the high priestesses. The ability to soothe feral souls, to calm the raging beast." I shook my head, denial my first refuge. "No, my parents were groundkeepers. They were nobodies." "Your parents," Lysander said with absolute certainty, "lied to save your life. If the High Council knew an anchor walked the earth, they would have caged you in gold and sold your peace to the highest warlord." He dropped to one knee before me. Behind him, Corbin did the same. Then Jax, then Silas. One by one, the 10 most feared warriors in history knelt on the rough wooden floor of the Howler's den, their heads bowed toward the girl in the flannel shirt. "We were waiting to die," Lysander said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "You didn't just give us shelter. You gave us back our minds, our sanity." He looked up, and his eyes held a vow etched in fire. "You are not our prisoner. You are our sanctuary, and anyone who tries to take you from us will learn that we may be broken, but we are still the sharpest weapons ever forged." I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched his cheek. The stubble was rough under my fingertips. For the first time since my parents died, I didn't feel like a mistake. I felt necessary. I took a shaky breath. "Well," I said, my voice small but clear, "if I'm staying, we need supplies. I can't live on raw rabbit, and this place, it needs a proper cleaning." A slow, genuine smile spread across Lysander's face. He leaned into my touch for a brief, electric second. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we go shopping, and may the moon have mercy on anyone in Frostwood who gets in our way." The main street of Frostwood was deceptively cheerful the next morning. Snow blanketed the quaint rooftops, and smoke curled from chimneys. It was a picture of pack unity, a lie I had believed my whole life. Everyone knew about the exile. My shame was the town's favorite gossip. So when a rumbling, mud-splattered truck, procured by Jax through means I didn't question, pulled onto the main street, a hush began to spread. When it parked boldly in front of Martha's general store, and 10 giants in worn leather and grim expressions poured out, forming a protective phalanx around one small, familiar figure, the hush became a dead silence. I kept my head down, my stomach churning. Their stares were physical things, scraping against my skin. "Head up, little anchor," Lysander's voice murmured by my ear, his hand a steady, warm pressure on my back. "You walk with Kingslayers now. Let them look." The bell above the door jingled a mocking tune as we entered. Martha, the shopkeeper, who once slipped me peppermints, looked up from her ledger. Her kindly face hardened into a mask of cold disapproval. "We don't serve exiles," she stated flatly, her voice cutting through the cozy warmth of the store. "Get out, before I call the Alpha." I flinched, the old reflex of obedience hitting me. But before I could turn, Silas was at the counter. He didn't say a word. He simply placed a massive hand flat on the polished wood. The entire counter trembled, and a jar of gumdrops rattled ominously. "We are customers," Silas grunted, each word a stone dropped into still water. "Food, blankets, clothes for the lady, the best you have." Martha paled, her eyes darting between Silas's impassive, scarred face and the other 9 men now casually browsing her aisles. I can't," she stammered. "Alpha Kale gave orders. Anyone helping her is an enemy of the pack." "Is that so?" A high, sneering voice lilted from the doorway. Seraphina stood there, framed in winter sunlight, wrapped in a white fox fur coat that cost more than my childhood home. 2 of her sycophants flanked her. She looked me up and down, her lip curling. "I heard a rumor you'd found some stray dogs to hide behind, living in a filthy barn. How perfectly fitting." A low, unified growl vibrated through the store shelves. It came from 10 throats at once. Lysander moved, a blur of controlled power, placing himself between Seraphina and me. "Careful," he warned, his voice so soft it was more dangerous than a shout. "My patience is a thin thread, and your understanding of your own safety is even thinner." Seraphina flushed, her composure cracking. "Do you know who I am? I'm the future Luna of Frostwood. I'll have you executed for threatening me." She whirled on Martha. "Call the enforcers. Tell them to bring silver chains." She turned her venomous smile back at me. "And you? You think these mangy outcasts can protect you? Kale is petitioning the council tonight. He's going to have that rotten barn of yours burned to the ground. For public health, of course." My blood turned to ice. "He wouldn't," she smirked, slinking closer, her voice dropping to a malicious whisper meant only for me. "He would," she smirked, slinking closer, her voice dropping to a malicious whisper meant only for me. "He would. Unless you come back. Crawl back to the pack house on your knees. Beg for his forgiveness. Swear to be a silent, obedient servant. You can clean my rooms. It's better than burning, isn't it?" I looked at her, at the cruel triumph in her eyes. I saw all the years of her sly pinches, her whispered insults, her stolen joys. Then I looked at Lysander. He was a statue of fury, but he was watching me, waiting, giving me the choice. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of old wood, leather, and the faint, clean scent of the man standing guard over me. "No," I said. Seraphina blinked. "What?" "I said no," I repeated, louder. The entire store was listening. "I would rather freeze in a barn with strays who show me kindness than breathe the same air as monsters like you in a palace." The silence was absolute. Seraphina's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret that. Martha, don't you dare sell them a thing." Lysander sighed, a deep sigh of exasperation. "We tried civility." He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a wallet, but a small, heavy disc of obsidian, etched with a complex, swirling symbol that seemed to drink the light. He placed it on the counter with a definitive thud. "By the inviolable laws of the Old Kingdom, a commissioned officer of the Royal Guard may requisition necessary provisions in times of strategic need. This seal accesses the Crown's reserve. Refusal is not disobedience. It is treason." Martha's jaw dropped. She stared at the obsidian seal as if it were a live serpent. The King's Reserve? But the monarchy fell." "The monarchy's accounts did not," Lysander said, leaning over the counter. Now, we will be taking the food, the blankets, the warm clothing, the tools. His gaze landed on a display of imported Swiss chocolate. And those. You can't! Serafina shrieked. Watch me, Lysander said flatly. He grabbed the box of chocolates, tore it open, and handed a piece to me. As of this moment, he declared to the stunned store, the Howler's Den is a sovereign territory under the protection of the Shadow Guard. Tell your Alpha that if he brings a torch within a mile of our home, we won't kill him. We will dismantle this pretty little town, brick by sentimental brick. He placed his arm around my shoulders, a solid, unshakable weight. Let's go. We have a home to build. As we left, laden with bags, I took a bite of the chocolate. It was rich and sweet, but the look on Serafina's face, standing powerless and furious in the middle of Martha's General Store, was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. 3 days of peace. It was a foreign, fragile currency, and I spent every moment waiting for it to shatter. The Howler's Den was transforming. Under the relentless, efficient work of 10 super soldiers, the rotting barn became a fortress. The roof no longer leaked, the walls were reinforced and insulated with stolen, requisitioned materials. A cast iron stove appeared, along with proper bedding, a rough-hewn table and chairs. It was stark, but it was warm, and for the first time it felt like a place, not just a refuge. I found a rhythm. I organized supplies, attempted to cook, which made Jax howl with laughter before he gently took over, and tried to mend the worn men's clothes. I was useful. I was seen. When a chill draft found me, 3 jackets were offered before I could shiver. When I woke gasping from a nightmare of frozen doors and Kale's eyes, I'd find Lysander sitting at the foot of my bedroll, a silent, watchful sentinel in the dark. You're staring again, his voice rumbled one afternoon. He stood in the doorway, shirtless after chopping wood, the fading light glinting off the sweat on his scars. I blushed, looking away from the fascinating map of his survival. I'm just not used to it, I admitted softly, feeling safe. He crossed the room, his footsteps sure and quiet. He stopped before me, and his hand, calloused and rough, came up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind my ear. The gentleness of the gesture, from such a lethal man, stole my breath. You are the anchor, Alara, he said, his voice low and intense. You silence the howling in our souls. Keeping you safe is not a duty. It is the only purpose that makes our continued existence matter. Before I could formulate a response, a new sound cut through our quiet world, a deep, mechanical thrumming that grew rapidly louder, vibrating the very floorboards. It was a sound Frostwood never heard, the beating rotors of a helicopter. Lysander moved instantly, shoving me behind him with one arm. The other 9 materialized from the shadows, weapons in hand, eyes shifting to predatory slits. This was not a pack threat. This was something bigger. The black helicopter, sleek and menacing, settled in the snowfield before the den. On its side was not the Frostwood wolf, but the stark silver symbol of a balanced scale. The High Council, Silas spat, the words like a curse. Kalen called in the authorities, Jax muttered, cracking his knuckles. Stand down, Lysander ordered, his voice a steel cable of tension. If we attack council agents, they bring armies. We play this diplomatically. The door opened. 3 men in impeccably tailored suits stepped out, untouched by the wind. Behind them, looking smug and vindicated, stood Kale and Serafina. The lead suit, a man with silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of a bank ledger, approached. Counselor Oren. His reputation for cold, legal obliteration preceded him. Lysander of the Shadow Guard, a relic of a bygone era. I thought your unit was disbanded. We retired, Lysander replied, his tone equally cool. You're disturbing our retirement. State your business. Oren adjusted his cufflink. Alpha Kale has filed a formal petition, the matter of stolen pack property. The girl, Alara, is a ward of Frostwood. Her parents died indebted to the pack. By law, that debt transfers to her, 50,000 gold credits. Until it is paid, she is indentured to Alpha Kale. She must return with him immediately. The world tilted. That's a lie, I cried from behind Lysander. My parents owed nothing. They were caretakers. Kale stepped forward, a ledger in his hands. A fake, I knew it in my bones. The blight in the Alpha's orchard, caused by your father's negligence. The cost was considerable. You belong to me, Alara. You can't run from your debts. Lysander took a step forward, a growl building in his chest. She goes nowhere. If you refuse, Counselor Orrin said calmly, I am authorized to declare the Shadow Guard a rogue terrorist cell. A drone strike authorization for this coordinate is pre-approved. It would be a shame for such historic rubble to be vaporized. The threat hung in the frozen air, more lethal than any claw. Lysander looked at the sky, then at his brothers. They could survive much. I could not. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the furious, helpless defeat. Fine, Lysander snarled, the word tasting like ash. We will submit to a tribunal, a formal hearing of the facts. A tribunal is for disputes between highborns or recognized entities. This is a matter of a servant and her master. I demand it, Lysander's voice exploded, using the full force of his alpha aura, a wave of power that made the counselors stumble back a step. Orrin studied him, a flicker of irritation in his cold eyes. He had not expected this. The old laws were inconvenient, but they were still laws. Very well, he conceded tightly. Tomorrow, noon, in the Frostwood Square. Bring the girl. He turned to leave, then paused. If she loses, Lysander, she doesn't just return to him. Unpaid debts of this magnitude send the debtor to the public auction block. Prepare to watch your anchor be sold to the highest bidder. He walked back to the helicopter, Kale and Seraphina casting triumphant glares over their shoulders as they followed. The helicopter lifted, the whirlwind of snow it kicked up stinging my face. The silence it left behind was deafening. Lysander turned to me. The fury was gone, replaced by a grim, unwavering resolve. He took my cold hands in his warm, scarred hands. We have one night, he said, one night to find the truth they buried. We will not lose you to their lies, Alara. I swear it on the bones of the king we failed. The peace was over. The war for my life, for my very soul, began now. The night after the council's ultimatum was the longest of my life. The cozy warmth we'd built in the den felt like a sham, a fragile dollhouse about to be kicked apart by the polished boot of bureaucracy. Lysander was a storm contained in human skin, pacing the length of the main space like a caged tiger. His brothers were silent, each lost in their own grim thoughts, sharpening blades or checking weapons with a quiet, deadly focus. I sat on the edge of my bedroll, the weight of Kale's lie crushing me. 50,000 gold credits. It was an impossible sum, more than a groundskeeper would see in 10 lifetimes. It was a number designed to be a prison sentence. He forged the ledger, I said into the heavy silence, my voice sounding small. My father loved those trees. He'd have died before letting blight touch them. Lysander stopped his pacing and knelt in front of me. His golden eyes were fierce in the firelight. We know it's a lie, little anchor, but in their court, a lie written on official paper has more power than our truth shouted from the rooftops. We need evidence. We need the real story. Jax leaned forward, his usual humor absent. The truth is buried with your parents, Alara, in Frostwood Cemetery. A cold that had nothing to do with the draft seeped into my bones. The thought of disturbing their rest felt like a betrayal. I can't. You may not have to, a rough, unused voice said. Every head turned. Silas had spoken. He rarely did, and his voice was a gravelly scrape, as if from disuse. He was looking not at me, but at a small, worn leather satchel he'd pulled from a hidden niche in the wall. He brought it over and placed it on the table. When we first took you in, Silas said, each word deliberate, we searched your bag for threats, for tracking devices. We found this. He pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle tied with a faded blue ribbon, my mother's ribbon. My heart clenched. That's my mother's sewing kit. Silas nodded. Hidden beneath the spools of thread. We deemed it personal, not a threat. He carefully unwrapped the cloth. Nestled among thimbles and needles was not a piece of jewelry or a secret letter, but a heavy, tarnished key. It was ornate, old, made of black iron, and it bore a trainy, intricate symbol on its bow, a crescent moon embraced by thorny vines. I had never seen it before in my life. "This is no sewing box key," Lysander breathed, picking it up. He examined the symbol, his face hardening into a mask of shock and dawning understanding. "This is a vault key from the Royal Archives of Valerius." The name meant nothing to me, but it sent a visible jolt through every man in the room. They looked from the key to me, their expressions shifting from confusion to something akin to reverence. "The lost house," Finn whispered. "Your parents weren't just hiding you from a pack alpha," Lysander said, his eyes locking on mine with terrifying intensity. "They were hiding you from history itself. This key, this symbol, is the crest of House Valerius, the last royal line before the Great Fracture, the bloodline of the Spirit Weaver priestesses." The words swirled around me, meaningless and profound. Royal line? Spirit Weaver? It was a children's tale. My mother mended socks. My father smelled of soil and pine resin. They were protecting the last ember of a fire the world thought was extinguished, Corbin said, his voice gentle. "This key doesn't lead to a sewing box, Alara. It leads to a truth that could shatter Kale's lies and Oren's entire case." "Where?" I asked, the word a dry croak. "The archives are beneath the old capital city, a day's hard travel from here," Lysander said, already moving, grabbing his coat. "It's a ruin, guarded by old magic and older fears, but this key is our invitation." "We don't have a day," I protested. "The tribunal is at noon tomorrow." A grim, determined smile touched Lysander's lips. "Then we ride through the night. The Shadow Guard does not know the meaning of impossible. Jax, get the truck ready. Silas, Corbin, Finn, you're with us. The rest guard the den. If Kale tries anything before the tribunal, make him regret it." Within minutes, we were in the truck, Jax at the wheel, hurtling down dark, snow-packed roads away from Frostwood. Lysander sat beside me in the back, the key a cold, heavy secret in his hand. The headlights cut a lonely path through the endless white night. "What will we find?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the engine's roar. "Your birthright," he said simply, his gaze on the darkness ahead. "And hopefully a weapon sharp enough to cut through all their lies." The ruins of the old capital, Valerium, were not like anything I'd ever seen. Frostwood was wood and stone, warm and alive. This was a skeleton of marble and granite, a corpse of an empire picked clean by time and war. Towering broken columns clawed at the moonlit sky like the ribs of a fallen giant. We parked the truck in a hidden gully and proceeded on foot, the silence of the place pressing in on us, heavy and mournful. Lysander led the way with an unerring sense of direction, as if walking paths he'd trodden 1,000 times in another life. We moved through the ghostly streets, past fountains frozen solid, past statues of forgotten heroes with their faces worn smooth by centuries of wind and water. "The archives entrance is in the catacombs beneath the old palace," he murmured, his voice hushed in the sacred quiet. "The magic here is sleepy, but it is not dead. Follow my steps exactly." He brought us to a collapsed archway, half buried in snow and rubble. With surprising care, he and the others began moving stones, revealing a narrow, dark staircase descending into the earth. The air that wafted up was not damp and foul, but dry and cold, smelling of ancient parchment and stone dust. We descended, the darkness swallowing us. Lysander produced a small, hooded lantern that cast a weak blue light. The stairs seemed to go on forever, coiling deep into the heart of the earth. My legs trembled, not from fatigue, from a deep, resonant fear of what we were unearthing. At the bottom, a massive door of blackened bronze barred our way. It was covered in bas-relief scenes of wolves under a full moon, of coronations, of great battles, and in the very center, a keyhole shaped like a crescent moon wrapped in thorns. Lysander handed me the key. "This is your door, Ilara. Only the blood of Valerius, or a key held in their trust, can open it." My hand shook as I took it. The metal was icy. I stepped forward, the eyes of the 4 warriors on my back. I fit the key into the lock. It turned not with a metallic clunk, but with a soft musical chime that echoed down the dark hallway behind the door. The massive door swung open silently, without a whisper of protest. Beyond was not a dusty tomb, but a vast, impossibly preserved hall. The blue light from our lantern glinted off rows and rows of crystalline shelves that stretched into the darkness, each holding scrolls, books, and strange artifacts that glimmered with a soft, internal light. The air hummed with a low, magical frequency, the collective whisper of 10,000 secrets. The Hall of Whispers, Corbin breathed, his usual stoicism replaced by awe. We don't have time to marvel, Lysander said, though even he looked moved. Ilara, think. Your parents, your name, your true name. The archives are keyed to blood and identity. Focus. I walked forward, my boots silent on the seamless black floor. I felt a pull, a gentle, insistent tugging in my chest, just like I'd felt toward Corbin in his madness, but softer, older. It led me to a central dais. On it sat not a book, but a single, flawless white crystal orb, resting on a stand of silver vines. A memory stone, Finn said, his voice hushed, for the direct line. Touch it, Lysander urged. Ask your question. I swallowed, my throat tight. I placed my hands on the cool, smooth crystal. I closed my eyes and thought of my mother's laugh, my father's rough hand on my head. I thought of the lie Kale told. Who am I? The orb blazed with light. Images, sounds, and emotions flooded into me, not as a vision, but as a direct download of memory into my soul. I saw my mother, not as the humble groundskeeper's wife, but as a young woman in silver robes, her eyes shining with the same harmonic power I now felt in myself. Selene, a voice whispered, last high priestess of Valerius. I saw my father, not kneeling in the dirt, but standing tall in royal armor, a crown of woven thorn and moonlight on his brow. Cedric, the voice said, the last king. I saw the fracture, the coup led by greedy alphas and the traitorous council that sought to destroy the ancient spiritual power of the monarchy. I saw my parents fleeing in the night, a swaddled infant, me, in my mother's arms. They used the last of their magic to cloak their lineage, to become Silas and Mara, simple folk who loved the earth. They chose Frostwood for its remoteness, and they took jobs under the Alpha not out of debt, but to hide in plain sight. The final memory was a quiet one. My mother, her priestess power almost gone, sealing this very key into her sewing kit. Her whispered words echoed in the crystal and in my mind. For our daughter, when the moon calls her home, the truth is her shield, her blood is her throne. The light from the orb faded. I staggered back, my eyes flying open, tears streaming down my face. The truth was not a weapon, it was a mountain, and it had just fallen on me. Lysander was there, his hands steadying my shoulders. Ilara? I looked up at him, seeing the reflection of the orb's dying light in his wide golden eyes. My name, I said, my voice now carrying an echo of that ancient harmonic resonance, is Ilara of House Valerius, daughter of King Cedric and High Priestess Selene, and I owe Alpha Kale Blackwood nothing. The Frostwood town square at noon was a circus of tension. The entire pack had been summoned, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and forced loyalty. A raised platform had been erected. On one side sat Counselor Orin, looking impeccably bored, with Kale and Seraphina beside him, radiating triumph. On the other were empty chairs for us. In the center of the platform stood the Bloodstone, a jagged, opaque crystal on a pedestal. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. It was the tool they would use to shame me, to prove my lowly blood. We arrived not in the stolen truck, but on foot, walking through the parted crowd in a silent, grim procession. Lysander led, a pillar of scarred defiance. I walked beside him, the black iron key a hidden weight in my pocket, the new truth a blazing fire in my heart. Jax, Silas, Corbin, and Finn flanked us, their presence a wall of silent threat. The murmuring crowd fell silent as we took our seats. The contrast was stark, Oren's cold polish versus our rough, travel-worn readiness. "This tribunal is now in session," Oren announced, his voice amplified by a microphone. "The matter is clear. Does the indentured servant Ilara, formerly of Frostwood, owe a lawful debt to Alpha Kale, and is she therefore her property until it is paid?" He looked at Kale. "Present your evidence." Kale stood, holding up the forged ledger. He spoke eloquently of blight, of negligence, of the catastrophic financial loss. He painted my parents as careless fools and me as their worthless offspring, shirking my responsibility. The pack listened, some nodding, others avoiding my gaze. When he finished, Oren turned to us. "Do you have evidence to dispute this legally binding document?" Lysander stood. "We disputed very foundation. The document is a forgery. The debt is a fiction." Oren smiled thinly. "Allegations are not evidence. Do you have a counterledger, a witness?" "We have something better," Lysander said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "We have truth." He looked at me and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. This was the moment. My legs felt like water, but I stood. The eyes of the pack, of my former tormentors, of the cold counselor, were all on me. I felt the old, cowering Omega inside me try to shrink away, but the new voice, the echo of Celine and Cedric, rose up, calm and clear. "Counselor Oren," I said, my voice carrying without the need for the microphone. "Alpha Kale claims my bloodline is so weak, so worthless, that I am fit only for servitude. He invites you to use the bloodstone to prove it. I accept his invitation." A shockwave of whispers rippled through the square. Kale looked startled, then smug. This was what he wanted, a public, magical display of my inferiority. Oren raised an eyebrow. "Very well. Approach the stone." I walked to the center of the platform. The bloodstone looked inert, dead. I could feel Kale's gloating stare, Seraphina's delighted smirk. I placed my hand on the cool, smooth crystal. I closed my eyes and thought of my mother's laugh, my father's rough hand on my head. I thought of the lie Kale told. For a moment, nothing happened. Kale opened his mouth to crow. Then, the stone moved. It didn't just glow, it erupted. A column of pure, blinding silver light shot from the crystal, piercing the gray winter sky. It was laced with threads of gold and the faint spectral green of growing vines. The light accompanied a sound, a deep harmonic chord that vibrated in the teeth of every person present. The force of the energy knocked Kale and Seraphina backward out of their chairs. The light coalesced above the stone, forming a shimmering, holographic emblem that hovered in the air for all to see. A crescent moon, cradled and protected by a crown of white intertwined thorns. The crest of Valerius. The square was utterly, deathly silent. Every wolf, from the lowest Omega to the enforcers, felt the primal, hierarchical command in that symbol. It was the blood of the originals, the font of all pack magic. Counselor Oren was on his feet, his polished composure shattered. His spectacles were askew, his face pale as milk. That is impossible. The Valerius line was extinguished." Lysander's voice, loud and triumphant, cut through the silence. "The line was hidden, not extinguished." He strode to my side, pointing at the fading emblem. "Ilara is not a servant. She is not an indentured Omega. She is Ilara of the House of Valerius, the last descendant of the royal bloodline. By the oldest laws, the very laws you hide behind, Oren, All debts of a subject to a local alpha are null and void in the presence of the crown. In fact, he turned his molten gaze on Kael, who was shaking on the ground. It is the alpha who owes fealty, and for his lies, his forgery, and his attempt to enslave royalty, the punishment is not debt, it is death. The word hung in the air. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been vaporized. Kael stared at me, his frozen lake eyes wide with terror and incomprehension. The girl he had thrown away was now the sun his entire world revolved around, and he had just tried to sell the sun at a flea market. Chaos, pure and absolute, erupted in the square. The revelation was a bomb dropped on the fragile order of Frostwood. The Bloodstone's light had faded, but its truth lingered, seared into the minds of every witness. The pack members looked from the cowering, broken figure of Kael to me, their expressions a storm of shock, fear, and dawning, terrible awe. Counselor Oren was the first to regain a semblance of control, though his hands still trembled as he straightened his glasses. This is an unprecedented situation. The verification of the Bloodstone is incontrovertible. The claimant, Ilara, is indeed of the Valerius blood. He said the name with a hushed reverence that made my skin crawl. He was not on my side. He was recalculating. Kael found his voice, a ragged, desperate thing. "No, it's a trick, a Shadow Guard illusion. She's a nobody." He scrambled to his feet, his alpha aura flaring in a pathetic, sputtering burst of defiance. "Seize her, now!" His personal guards, 3 hulking warriors already mid-shift into their wolf forms, hesitated for only a second. Their loyalty to their alpha warred with the ancient, bone-deep recognition of the crest that had just blazed in their sky. Alpha Command 1. With snarls, they lunged onto the platform, bypassing Lysander, their target clear. Me. Time seemed to warp. I saw their saliva-flecked maws, the hunger for violence in their eyes. I saw Seraphina's face, alight with vicious hope. And in that stretched second, the new power inside me, the legacy of the Spirit Weaver, did not surge in fear. It rose in a wave of cool, righteous indignation. These wolves were not just attacking me, they were defying the very order their species was built upon. The harmony was broken, and the anchor felt the discord like a shrieking nail on stone. I did not step back. I stepped forward, one single step. My eyes, I knew without seeing, flooded with that liquid silver light. I opened my mouth, and when I spoke, it was not my voice alone. It was the voice of the moon, the voice of the first pact, the voice of the crown. Kenil. The word was not loud. It was a peal of thunder that originated in the heart of the square and radiated outward. It was not a request. It was a fundamental recalibration of reality. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The 3 attacking wolves didn't just stop. They were slammed into the wooden platform by an invisible, colossal force. The sound of the impact was a sickening crunch of submission. They didn't get up. They whined, high and pitiful, rolling onto their sides, exposing their vulnerable throats and bellies in total, instinctual surrender. The wave rolled out. Every single pack member in the square cried out, grabbing their heads. Their knees buckled. As one, they fell, first to their knees, then pressing their foreheads to the frozen ground, a sea of bowed backs under the gray winter sky. Even the Shadow Guard staggered. Lysander drove the point of his sword into the platform to stay upright, his owls wide with a shock that morphed into blazing, fervent devotion. He had believed in my bloodline. Now he had witnessed its power. The only one left standing, swaying like a sapling in a hurricane, was Kael. His alpha pride was a final, crumbling dam against the tidal wave of command. Blood trickled from his nose from the pressure. Veins stood out on his neck and forehead. "I am an alpha," he gritted out, each word a bloody sacrifice. I turned to face him fully. I felt calm, centered, terrible. I walked toward him, the silence of 500 kneeling wolves roaring in my ears. I stopped an arm's length away. "You are an alpha of dirt and sticks. I am the heart of the forest itself. Your wolf knows. Your blood knows. Why are you the last to understand? The dam broke. With a final shattered cry, Kyle legs gave way. He didn't kneel gracefully. He collapsed, hitting the platform hard, his body convulsing once before lying still in a posture of utter defeat. In the ringing silence, I turned my gaze to the other standing figure. Counselor Oren had not been forced to his knees. Counselor agents were technically outside pack hierarchy, but he had bowed his head so low it was a gesture of deep respect and fear. "Counselor," I said, the power receding from my voice, leaving it tired, human, but unwavering. "What is the sentence for forgery, attempted enslavement, and treason against the crown?" Oren lifted his head, his face ashen. "The sentence for treason against the royal bloodline," he said, his voice hollow, "is death, immediate and absolute." He looked at Lysander, who had pulled his sword from the wood, his expression hungry. The Shadow Guard would be within their rights to carry it out. Kyle moaned into the wood. "Mercy." I looked down at the man who had been my entire universe, the man who had sentenced me to a frozen death for the crime of existing. I felt no pity, only a vast, cold clarity. "No," I said. A murmur from the crowd. Was the new queen weak? "Death is too easy," I continued, my voice carrying, "and I will not start my reign by staining this square with his pathetic blood." I looked at Oren. "I strip Kyle Blackwood of his title, his rank, and his pack membership. I exile him from Frostwood and from all recognized territories. He is rogue." My eyes then found Seraphina, who was weeping silently on her knees, and his accomplice shares his fate. I pointed north, towards the endless frozen wastes where the blizzards were born. "You have 1 hour to cross the boundary. If you are found on my lands after that," I said, echoing his own cruel decree with perfect poetic precision, "you will be hunted, not for justice, for sport." The sentence was not forgiveness. It was a condemnation to the very hell he had designed for me. It was the cold, not the claw. The aftermath of the tribunal was a blur of surreal quiet. The pack, released from the compulsion of the command, rose slowly, their eyes wide and wary, filled with a new kind of fear, the fear of the divine made flesh. They dispersed in hushed groups, casting glances back at the platform where their world had been remade. Counselor Oren approached me, his demeanor radically altered. The bored bureaucrat was gone, replaced by a man who had seen the foundations of his reality crack. "Your Majesty," he said, the title feeling alien and heavy. "The council will need to be formally notified. Arrangements will need to be made for your return to the capital, for the restoration of the monarchy." "The capital is a ruin, Counselor," I said, cutting him off. I felt exhausted, the adrenaline leaching away to leave a deep, hollow ache. And I am not ready for a throne of marble. My throne for now is a reclaimed barn filled with broken warriors who showed me kindness when the world showed me ice. Lysander stood beside me, a solid, reassuring presence. He said nothing, but his stance communicated everything. Where you go, we go. Oren blinked, processing this. "But protocol, the people need to see their queen." "They saw her today," I said firmly. "They saw her justice. That is enough for now. The Howler's Den remains my seat. You may report that to your council." I turned my back on him, a move that felt both terrifying and powerful. The message was clear. The old rules no longer applied. I walked through the emptying square with the Shadow Guard flanking me, a procession of silent power. We didn't take the truck. We walked the forest path back to the den, the winter woods hushed and respectful. Once inside the familiar, rough-hewn safety of the den, the full weight of the day crashed down on me. My legs gave way, and I sank onto a stool by the fire. I stared at the flames, seeing not wood burning, but the silver column of light, the kneeling wolves, KL's broken face. It doesn't feel like victory, I whispered. Lysander crouched before me, blocking my view of the fire, forcing me to look at him. It was justice, he said, his voice low. And it was only the beginning. The hard part starts now. What could be harder than that? Jax said from where he was stoking the stove, his usual grin absent. Not just punishing one bad alpha, but leading, healing. Frostwood is terrified. The council is scrambling. Other packs will hear. Some will seek your favor. Others will see a young, untested queen and think you are a prize to be captured or a threat to be eliminated. The truth of his words settled over me, colder than the exile's snow. I had traded the immediate threat of KL for the immense, sprawling responsibility of a crown I never asked for. I don't know how to be a queen, I admitted, the confession torn from a place of deep vulnerability. I know how to mend fences and tend herbs. I know how to be quiet and unseen. You know how to be kind, Corbin said softly. You know how to bring peace to a raging soul. That is what we needed. That is what this broken world needs more than another warlord on a throne. Lysander took my hand, his rough palm enveloping mine. We are your shield, Elara, your strength, but the heart, the vision, that must come from you. The Spirit Weaver doesn't lead armies. She heals the tears in the fabric of the pack. You showed that today. You didn't destroy KL. You removed a sickness. That is the essence of the old monarchy. Stewardship. Harmony. His words were a balm. They didn't erase the fear, but they gave it a shape, a purpose. I wasn't being asked to become a tyrant. I was being asked to become what I already was, but on a larger scale. An anchor for a whole nation. What's the first step? I asked, my voice gaining a sliver of steadiness. First, Finn said, we secure your territory, officially. Orin will send word, but we need sentries, a perimeter. The Howler's Den can't just be a barn anymore. It's a royal hold. Second, Silas grunted, speaking more than he had in weeks, we train. Train? I asked. You have the blood power, the command, but it's a raw, uncontrollable surge. You must learn to control it, to use its finer threads, to heal, not just to compel, to see bonds, not just break them. Your mother's legacy is not just in your blood, but in your potential. We may be warriors, but the archives we found, they will hold the teachings of the Spirit Weavers. We must return and learn. The thought of more lessons, of delving deeper into the terrifying power I'd unleashed was daunting, but it was also a path forward, a purpose. I looked around at the 10 faces watching me, scarred, fierce, loyal. My monsters, my guardians, my family. All right, I said, squaring my shoulders. We secure, we train, we learn. I met Lysander's golden gaze, but we do it our way. No gold crowns, no stuffy palaces. We build our kingdom from here, from the ground up, and we make it a place where no one is ever thrown into the snow for being different. A slow, proud smile spread across Lysander's face. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. As my queen commands. For the first time since the bloodstone flashed, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or exhaustion. It was a fragile, budding sense of rightness. The crown was a weight, but I was not carrying it alone. I was surrounded by 10 pillars of strength, and within me was the ancient, gentle power of the moon itself. The path ahead was shrouded in shadow and threat, but for the first time in my life, I was not walking it alone, and I was not walking it as prey. I was walking it as a queen, with my wolves at my side. Winter began its slow, reluctant retreat from the territory around the Howler's Den. The snows melted, revealing the stubborn green of pine needles and the first brave shoots of new growth. The den itself was transforming. Under the relentless, skilled labor of the Shadow Guard, it was no longer a hiding place, it was a stronghold. A tall, sturdy palisade of sharpened timber now encircled the clearing. Tower watches, rough-hewn but formidable, rose at the corners. The barn itself had been reinforced, its interior divided into functional spaces, an armory, a meeting hall, a library of sorts for the ancient scrolls we began to recover from the archives, and my private quarters, still simple, but now with a window that looked out over the awakening forest. The physical changes were the easy part. The real work happened in the quiet hours, in the sacred space we cleared at the heart of the den. My training had begun. Lysander was my constant, patient, and frustratingly demanding instructor. The power within me, the Spirit Weaver legacy, was not a muscle to be flexed. It was a symphony to be conducted, and I was a novice who kept dropping the baton. Again, Lysander said, his voice calm. He stood across from me in the cleared circle, a single wilting winter rose placed on a stump between us. The exercise was to revive it, to channel the harmonic energy of life, not command. Don't force it. Feel the thread of its fading vitality. Hum to its frequency. I closed my eyes, reaching out with that new sense inside me. I could feel the rose, a faint, sad silver shimmer against the darkness of my mind. I tried to pour energy into it, to push. The rose shuddered, and a petal turned to black ash and flaked away. "You're shouting at it," Corbin observed from where he sat sharpening a blade. "It's a whisper, not a war cry." I gritted my teeth, frustration a hot coal in my stomach. "It's dying. It needs strength." "It needs understanding," Lysander corrected gently. "You are an anchor. You connect. You don't dominate. Forget what you did in the square. That was a tsunami. Now you must learn to be the gentle rain that nourishes." I took a deep breath, trying to shed my frustration. I thought not of power, but of my mother's hands tending her tiny herb garden, of the quiet patience of growth. I reached for the rose again, not with a command, but with an offering, a gentle pulse of recognition, of empathy for its struggle. A soft, silver-tinged glow emanated from my fingertips. It didn't shoot out, it drifted, like dandelion seeds on a breeze, and settled over the wilted bloom. The stem straightened, the browned edges of the petals flushed with a pale, rosy pink. A fresh, delicate fragrance filled the air. I opened my eyes, a gasp of pure wonder escaping my lips. The rose stood proud and alive, dew-kissed and perfect. A rare, full smile broke across Lysander's stern face. It transformed him, softening the scars, warming the gold in his eyes. "There," he said, his voice thick with pride. "That is the true power, the power that built kingdoms, not on fear, but on reciprocal care." The moment of triumph was shattered by the sound of the perimeter bell, a deep, resonant gong Jax had fashioned. It wasn't the frantic alarm of attack, but the single, measured toll that signaled approach. We exchanged glances. Our first visitors. At the main gate, a delegation of 5 wolves waited, still in their human forms. They wore the colors and insignia of the neighboring pack, the Stonefall clan, a people known for their stern neutrality and formidable mountain fighters. At their head stood a broad-shouldered, gray-bearded alpha named Magnus. Lysander and I went to meet them, the rest of the Shadow Guard melting into the defensive positions around the palisade, unseen but palpably present. "Alpha Magnus," I said, keeping my voice steady. I did not use the command, I used the tone I had practiced, regal, open, calm. Welcome to the hold of Valerius. Magnus's sharp eyes took in the fortified den, the watchtowers, the undeniable presence of legendary warriors in the shadows. But most of all, they studied me. He bowed, not as deeply as one would to a settled monarch, but with clear respect. Queen Alara, word travels on the wind, even to our high valleys. We came to see with our own eyes if the stories were true, that the last flower of Valerius has bloomed again in the winter. The stories are true, I said simply. Will you enter and break bread? The sun holds a little warmth today. It was a test, both of his intentions and of my hospitality. He nodded, and his warriors relaxed a fraction. Inside the main hall, over simple fare of venison and flatbread, Magnus came to his point. Your situation creates ripples, young queen. The council is in an uproar. Some packs whisper of a new golden age. Others see only instability, a prize to be claimed by the strongest. Lysander's posture tightened beside me, but he remained silent, letting me lead. I am not a prize, Alpha Magnus, I said, meeting his gaze squarely. I am a restorer. My goal is not to conquer territories, but to restore the ancient harmonies between packs, to be a neutral voice where there has been only rivalry. He studied me for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully. A noble goal. Naive, perhaps. The world is not as it was in your ancestors' time. But, he leaned forward, his voice dropping, my pack remembers the old ways. We remember the peace the spirit weavers fostered. We have no love for the council's cold bureaucracy. You have dealt with a corrupt alpha justly. That speaks to your character. He set his cup down. I will not pledge fealty today. That is a path for cautious steps. But I offer you this, a pact of non-aggression, and my word that Stonefall will not listen to those who call for your removal. For now, that is the thread you must weave with. It wasn't a victory parade. It was a first fragile thread of diplomacy. It was real. It was more than I had yesterday. I accept your thread, Alpha Magnus, I said, a genuine smile touching my lips, and I offer you ours. Should you ever have need of a mediator or face a threat that respects no borders, the hold of Valerius will remember your fairness today. The meeting ended with respectful nods, not grand declarations. But as I watched Magnus and his warriors disappear into the forest, I felt a new kind of strength. It wasn't the terrifying surge of the command. It was the slow, steady satisfaction of a first stone well laid. Later, under a sky dusted with early stars, I stood with Lysander on the new watchtower. You did well today, he said quietly. With the rose, with the alpha. You are finding your balance. I have good teachers, I replied, leaning my shoulder briefly against his solid arm. The contact was brief, but it sent a warm current through me that had nothing to do with magic. It feels daunting every day. The training, the politics, the weight of every look, every word. He looked down at me, his profile sharp against the starry sky. You were born for this weight, Alara. You carry it not on your back, but in your heart. And you do not carry it alone. We are here, every step, every rose, every treaty. I believed him. For the first time, looking out over the land that was slowly becoming mine to shepherd, I felt not like an imposter on a throne, but like a sapling finally rooted in the right soil. I was growing, and I was not alone. A full cycle of seasons turned over the hold of Valerius. The Howler's Den, once a symbol of fear, had become a beacon. It was not a palace of idle luxury, but a bustling, vibrant center of learning and reconciliation. The Shadow Guard were no longer ghosts. They were revered commanders, training a new generation of guardians who swore oaths to protect, not to pillage. My training progressed. Under Lysander's guidance and the wisdom of the ancient scrolls, I learned to see the world in threads of luminous connection. I could sense the health of the land, the subtle discord in a troubled heart, the strength of bonds between pack members. I held court not on a dais, but in the sun-dappled clearing, listening to disputes between neighboring packs and finding resolutions that sought balance, not blame. The command remained, a last resort sheathed deep within me, unused. News came, carried by traders and travelers. Kale and Seraphina had vanished into the northern wastes. Some said they'd perished in the first storm. Others whispered they'd been taken in by a band of desperate outcasts, living a life of bitter scarcity. Their fate was a closed book. I felt no triumph, only a quiet acknowledgement that the past was truly buried. The council, after much internal strife, had formally recognized the restored monarchy of Valerius. Councillor Oren, ever the pragmatist, had become our grudging liaison. The world was adjusting, but the greatest change was in the hearts of those within our hold. The Shadow Guard, once waiting for madness and death, now thrived with purpose. Their eyes were clear, their spirits settled by the constant, gentle hum of my anchoring presence. And between Lysander and me, the unspoken bond had deepened into something as steady and vital as the sunrise. It was a partnership of absolute trust, a silent conversation of glances and gestures, a warmth that filled the spaces between words. It was pure, respectful, and it was the foundation of my strength. The final test came not from an enemy army, but from the land itself. An unseasonal creeping blight began to spread in the western forests of the Stonefall territory, the very pack that had offered us our first thread of peace. It killed crops, sickened wildlife, and left a residue of spiritual malaise that no medicine could cure. Alpa Magnus sent a desperate plea. We rode out, not with an army, but with a small company, myself, Lysander, Jax, and Finn. We found the Blight's edge, a swath of gray, withering decay that seemed to suck the life from the very air. The Stonefall wolves watched, hope and skepticism warring in their eyes. "It's not natural," Finn muttered, his sensitive nose wrinkling. "It's a wound," I whispered, my spirit weaver sight activating. I could see it, a ragged, pulsing tear in the luminous fabric of the land's life force, leaking a poisonous, dark energy. Someone or something scarred this place deeply, long ago. The imbalance is just now manifesting. "Can you heal a scar on the world?" Alpha Magnus asked, his voice heavy with despair. "I can try to anchor it shut," I said. I had never attempted anything so vast. I walked to the very edge of the blight. The decay felt like a physical coldness, a silence that hated sound. I knelt, placing my bare hands on the cold, dead soil. I closed my eyes and reached down, not with a push of power, but with a deep, encompassing connection. I felt the pain of the land, a deep, ancient grief. I felt the shock of an old betrayal, a magic poisoned here in a forgotten battle. The scale of it was overwhelming, a bottomless well of sorrow that threatened to drown my own light. I felt a hand on my shoulder, Lysander, then another on my other side, Jax. Finn placed a hand on my back. Through their touch, I felt not their power, but their unwavering stability, their faith. They were my anchors now. Fueled by that support, I poured my essence into the wound. I didn't fight the darkness. I acknowledged it. I sang to it, a wordless, harmonic hum of recognition and compassion, the song of the Spirit Weaver. I wove threads of pure, silver life energy, stitching them across the tear, not covering it, but integrating it, teaching the land to live around its old pain. Sweat beaded on my brow, my body trembled with the effort. The world narrowed to the song and the stitch. Then a green shoot, vibrant and impossibly healthy, pushed up between my fingers, then another. The gray receded like a tide, chased away by a wave of lush grass, wildflowers, and the sudden, deafening return of birdsong. The spiritual weight lifted, and sunlight truly touched the clearing for the first time in decades. I slumped backward, exhausted, but Lysander caught me, holding me against his chest. I looked up at the stunned faces of the Stonefall pack. They were kneeling, every one of them, tears on the faces of hardened warriors. Alpha Magnus approached. He didn't bow. He went to one knee, placed his fist over his heart, and lowered his head. "My queen," he said, his voice thick. "My pack. Our land owes you a debt that can never be repaid. The thread you offered, we would make it a bond. Stonefall pledges its fealty to the House of Valerius, now and for all generations." It was the moment, the true beginning, not taken by force, but earned by healing. That night, back at the hold, a celebration erupted, not just for the healed land, but for a future that finally felt secure, golden, and real. There was music, laughter, the smell of roasting meat and sweet herbs. I stood at the edge of the firelight, watching my people, the Shadow Guard laughing with Stonefall warriors, Omegas and Alphas sharing stories, the den glowing with light and life. Lysander came to stand beside me, our shoulders touching. He didn't speak. He simply offered me his hand. I took it, lacing my fingers through his. His grip was strong, calloused, and infinitely gentle. "You did it," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I looked around at the laughing faces, the sturdy walls of the hold, the forest standing tall and healthy under the moon. I thought of the rose I'd revived, the first fragile treaty, the healed scar on the land, each one a thread I had woven. "We did it," I corrected, squeezing his hand. "I was the needle, you were the steady hand." He brought my hand to his lips, not in a kiss of passion, but in a solemn, heartfelt vow of loyalty and deep, abiding care. It was a promise more binding than any ceremony. "Then let us keep weaving, my queen, for 100 peaceful years." As the celebration swirled around us under a sky dusted with 1,000,000 stars, I knew with absolute certainty that the lonely, shivering girl in the snow was gone forever. In her place stood Alara of Valerius, the spirit weaver queen, surrounded by her loyal guards, her growing people, and a peace she had nurtured with her own 2 hands. The journey had begun in a deadly blizzard of rejection, but it had led here to this warm, golden dawn, and it was only the beginning of their happily ever after. The end.